Live. Am I live? I'm live. Oh, that's very exciting. I am live. How exciting. The first thing to do is to get this onto the Facebook where I said it would be live. Please hold while your call is connecting. Comments for the stream. It's funny the things you learn about how to get around kind of the algorithm so people actually see your stuff. I don't even know if this is going to work, but can't hurt to try. You'll also notice that I did this one. Um, I did my first one at what was it? I did my first one at noon last week, and now I'm doing this one at 5, so it's closer to like drive time and stuff. I don't know if anyone's going to see this, but I love talking about our process, and it looks like you can still find my live videos on my YouTube. That is my hope. In any case, I get to talk about it, and then I'll talk about it later again on Instagram. But I just want to spend some time, talking more about Cobblestone Kingdom. I want to do these talks to start educating people, not just about Cobblestone Kingdom, but kind of where it falls in my entire art practice. And as a theater artist, as a playwright, it's not just about the writing. It's a practice. It's eventually a collaboration between me and a composer and a director and some actors. In a way, theater is different than other visual interactive mediums, even in some cases, because of how infinite it is. I like to say if you've got a TV and film, that's a finite thing because it's made and there it goes. If you get like a director's cut later, you've still got that original theatrical release, which is the thing that it is. And theater is different. Theater is more challenging in that way. And it's important to me to talk about what that means, what that looks like. I also have very little Wi Fi right now. So if I start getting glitchy and weird, that is what is going on. That's very strange. I don't know what that is about. I think in any case, I have a couple of topics to talk about today. And if you missed this, I'll do it on my Instagram. Actually, I'm going to put this on my Twitter too, just because I can. Why not? Let's do all of the social medias while I can. Oh, fun fact! Uh, apparently YouTube is a social media. I don't think of it as a social media platform. When I talk to people in marketing, they think of it that way, and I've never thought of it that way. That's kind of cool to me to think about. Okay, so there's two things I'm going to talk about today in regards to Cobblestone Kingdom. Last time I talked about the idea of the adaptation of Cinderella slightly before I probably went off topic, and a little bit about why I'm doing this project, what it means to me, and what new things I can bring to it. So I'm going to dive in a little deeper to that today. And so, really, this deeper dive is about Nightshade and Cobbles in the first place, which are kind of a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern type characters. They're more aware of the audience, they're more aware of themselves as characters in a play potentially. I've actually left it a little open to interpretation for the director. I didn't leave the window completely open, but it's like halfway open. And the director and actors can make some choices. I think, along with being able to play with gender presentation in this, I wanted that ambiguity. I don't always give that ambiguity. Sometimes I'm very clear about what I want. And sometimes we playwrights have to do that because directors and actors love to get in there and fumble with things a little bit. And sometimes that's great, and sometimes very much not. Um, and I understand why, because I've taken directing classes, so I understand why it's done. But there are some things where you absolutely need something done a certain way, and so you have to put it in. And so I do that. So one of the things about Cinderella is I think it has a great potential to be interactive, and so I added that into Cobblestone Kingdom. There's an element of almost a British panto to it, like a celebration of the fact that you're watching a show that is theatrical and it's still a show. But ideally, depending upon how pandemics pan out, this is something you're experiencing live with other people. You know, living, breathing people as an audience, and as an audience member, you're kind of like another step of the production. The audience is a member of the cast. In some cases, there are some shows, especially where it's like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, where you yell at the screen. It's like that, but in a theater. I've never seen the Rocky Horror Show, which is the stage version of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and I always kind of wondered if they do callbacks during that and how distracting it is. Um, but I think for me, it was really important to give that ability for people to get involved, get more invested in the story. I think that's kind of the next step in theater in a way, because people are now kind of moving away from just things they sit in front of. I mean, some people aren't. I know I myself have this happen with the Great British Bake Off, where I'll just put it on and unplug because I've seen it like 3 or 4 times, but I'm still kind of invested in it because I really like it and it's secure. Um, but I think for theater to be a success and kind of move forward, it's not necessarily about having to reinvent theater so much that you have to teach the audience how to be part of theater, but it's about what makes theater theater. It's about something being interactive, something being an investment for people, especially because the bigger a production you do, the more expensive your tickets have to be, so that somebody makes some money off of the thing. Um, and Cobblestone Kingdom is probably one of my potentially biggest cast, potentially biggest um, budget items. I mean, my Gay Jesus musical that I'm working on for a couple years down the road. I mean, that's a 25-person cast easily. It can be, or it should be. It can be written down too. And I don't want to ramble about that too much because that's in the future, and I want to talk about it now a little bit. But so I purposely created a few places in which the audience has a lot of power in this play, a lot of power to participate. It's a bit phantomy, it's a bit Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, it's a bit Deadpool. And I know people are very aware, even if they haven't like participated in those, they're very aware of those things sometimes. I want people to feel like they're a part of this kingdom and they're just watching this unfold. They're watching someone very lonely fall in love with someone who's a little aimless and who needs to be anchored a little bit. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the second part of it. But for the first part of it, in having Cobbles and Nightshade, who are expressly written to be kind of these genderqueer, manic, pixie, fey characters. They're meant to be over the top and funny and colorful. They're not meant to be subtle. There's nothing subtle about them. They're meant to be very physical, and so, like a person I would cast for this, it wouldn't be so much about gender, but it would be about the ability to be physical, the ability to have timing, the ability to listen, have empathy. There's a part in scene 2 where it's actively about interacting with the audience and telling jokes and getting people to shout out responses. So you have to have a little bit of improv with this character, which is not something any of the other characters really get. I would say Mr. and Mrs. Raven get it a little bit because they're kind of the wacky evil characters, very Madam Mim from Sorcerer in the Stone sort of way. But Rose and or Cobbles and Nightshade are meant to be this kind of wink to the idea of knowing you're in a play and having the production. If you saw the David Tennant version of Hamlet with Patrick Stewart, where they used that really cool thing where they did security cameras as a way to like get in the castle for the audience, it's a little bit like that. And I'm kind of very excited to see what that looks like, how that feels. A part of having a full staging is being able to actually see and feel that. And for people that don't know, in theater, you have different levels of how you do things. Like you might have a table read that's private so that you can just hear people speaking and there's no movement. You might do a table read with a bit of movement so you can see how things move, but it's still private. You might do a public table read or a public workshop. And especially in big cities like New York, they have a lot of that because they just have a lot of plays. And here in Portland, I've done that with like PDX playwrights specifically, which is really cool because you get to hear people, but then you also get feedback. And plays go through these different stages of this. And so to be able to kind of feel the energy and the movement of it, I don't just want to do a table read and a stage reading. They're fine, they have a place. And if I'm lucky enough to even get a stage reading, that's great. But the goal here is a full staging, as professional something as I can make it, as accessible something as I can make it, is my hope. For me, it's not something I do without intention. I think for me, it's really important that anyone auditioning, anyone coming into the audience, anyone on the crew understands that I'm not just writing a story that's Cinderella but with two dudes. There is that possibility, and in my mind, when I write Hawk and Seven, and Hawk is of course the prince, and Seven is kind of the Cinderella analog, I write them as male presenting because I would like to see that. But that doesn't make a sapphic interpretation or a trans interpretation or even an androgynous agender interpretation any less valid. For me, it's really important that it doesn't just look like female Cinderella, male prince. So then that's a discussion to be had about how can we make sure people understand this is specifically queer, not aggressive in a divine or a Southern Baptist sissy sort of way, but maybe in that sort of way. I don't really know until I've cast some people and I've really seen this come to life. But for me, it's important that it is a queer forced fairy tale. It's important to me that as a kind of Cinderella story, that there are certain things you keep, but then there are certain things you mess with. I mean, really, is Phantom of the Opera Phantom of the Opera if the chandelier doesn't come crashing down at least once? So that's the first part, is the idea of, as an audience member, it's interactive, you're participating a little more. There's legitimately places where you won't be expected, but you'll be encouraged to shout out answers to corny jokes, which is kind of a panto tradition in my mind, but I could be wrong because I've never actually been to a panto, but I have like thoughts about what panto is. Um, so there's that. And the second part of this um, is about the queerness to the Cinderella story and what that means. Not just what that means to have characters that are actively queer and presenting as potentially different genders than how you've seen Cinderella done before, but also about what does that mean to have characters be queer? What does that mean about power? What does that mean about dynamic? What does that mean about the community that surrounds them? Because in a traditional showing of Cinderella, you've got the king and queen, and they want their son to get married. Then the assumption is for children. In the Disney version in the 50s, that's explicit because the king talks about it in that scene where he's like jumping up and down the bed about grandchildren. And that's not always the case. There's a lot of Cinderellas that are essentially kind of sexless Barbie and Ken dolls in my mind. And I was thinking about this earlier today and how I wanted to say it because I didn't want to mince words. I think it's important to understand there's a difference between desire and kind of how sex necessarily happens, and that there's a difference between, a crush and lust and love. And all those things have nuance and will be explored. But in the case of this, I had a mentor that told me about a Merchant of Venice that she did, that it was protested twice. It was protested once because of the anti-Semitism of it, and that is a really big deal. It's very fair for people to have thoughts and feelings about that, obviously. But the other part of it was people got up and walked out at the beginning of the first act because two male characters were in bed together. And just the act of them being in bed together talking about a transaction was enough for people to really almost overly sexualize whatever was happening. and to be offended by that, which I immediately perked my ears to and was like, that doesn't seem like it should be offensive in this day and age. Because when you think about shows like Chicago that do a lot of burlesque stuff, especially in the film, I'm not really sure how the stage show handles it, but the film is very, burlesque and showy and body driven. And you think about things like Nine and things like Six, you think about burlesque itself. Um, and you even think about something like Victor Victoria, where the exploration of gender and gender identity and gender politics is really there. Julie Andrews in that scene where she's in the bath. I don't know if anybody's seen Victor Victoria, but it's amazing. You should see it. And so in this version of Cinderella, I was very aware of the idea of Cinderella and the Prince being this sort of Barbie and Ken, Lifetime, Movie of the Week, Hallmark channel couple, where they grow to be in love, but there's a very deep chasteness to it. In the version of Cinderella I saw on stage, they dance together, but except for a kiss at the end, if I'm remembering correctly, they don't really touch much. And you don't see this in Into the Woods either. Cinderella and the Prince, you don't really see. You see them on screen together, but they never really, touch or kiss that much. In fact, the Prince himself has a lot more nookie going on behind the scenes than he ever has with Cinderella. And so I thought about the idea in how I make this about my relationship toward how I wanted sex to be seen, and what that meant to me. And what I mean is, I didn't just want it to be two Ken dolls or two Barbie dolls or two G.I. Joes. I didn't want it over sexualized, but I didn't want it so devoid of sex that you're just like, this is another version of Cinderella. I'm not talking anything shocking. There's no full frontal male nudity. There's an option for it, but I am also aware of the people that may come to see it. So it's a part of working it out with the actors, and it's also about venue, and it's about kind of what the age range is for people coming in to see it. So there's different options, but it's much closer to something like The Tudors or something like that. Not quite as violent and graphic in that way. It's still very playful, but I didn't want to devoid characters of an identity inside sexuality where it's positive. I worked really hard to make sure there's active consent in this, even if there's hesitation and shyness and some social anxiety issues and some self-esteem issues. There's always consent. There's sex, but I've actually read it into the script because I had to figure out how to do this. It's that sex is never a punishment. It happens in this universe. It happens in most universes. But I didn't just want this to be a very sexless, chaste queer story, because there's a lot of that. And then it goes the other direction where it's a queer story, but it's all about sex, and it's almost demonizing sex by making it too much of a thing. And so there's really a balance here in how you do a story that's set in some kind of some kind of past, some kind of ye old time. And there's a way that you really handle it and mold it to what you want the story to be. For me, the sex is about connection, it's about anchoring, it's about finding someone that matters deeply, that you didn't even know mattered deeply until the moment you saw them. It's a love story, and I keep it that. I don't want it to be less than that. I'm not looking to deconstruct Cinderella that goes so far that it's not that. I like it to be a love story. I want to recognize it as that. I want it to be that because I think there are some really good components of that story to this. This is very much more of a Cinderella in the vein of, say, an Ever After, with Drew Barrymore as Danielle, and I can't remember the prince's name because nobody remembers the prince in that movie. But I don't want them to come in as perfect. I don't want them to come in as blank. I want the prince to struggle with the idea of settling down, and I wrote about that. The idea of the prince isn't terrified necessarily of getting married. He's terrified of who that turns him into. He's terrified of what freedom he might lose. And on a different scale, Seven, the Cinderella analog, is afraid of what it will mean to confront the prince, um, and all the people in the castle, and all these people with power when they have very little. It's not just about the love story. The love story is very present because it's a fairy tale, and I really like the idea of that. But it's about the connection. I make the moment they kiss very magical. I have no idea how I'm going to work that out with lighting, which is why I'm really hoping Grid has a lot of money, because there's some parts of it where I really want lighting and I don't want to have to cheapen out on that. I want for this to be, I don't want to call it messy, but I don't know what other word to use. There's something about this version of the Cinderella story, Cobblestone Kingdom, where it's a little more frank and honest, and it's a little more sexual because, generally speaking, for a large portion of the queer community, not all, for a large portion of the queer community, the idea of sex, the idea of having it, the idea of not having it, the idea of power, the idea of position, it's all there. And it's a discussion that is had, sometimes well, sometimes not so well. And I didn't want to shy away from that in this. That's part of kind of modernizing the tale for me, is taking the idea of these two sexless dolls that you can project on and making them slightly sexual, not in a graphic way. Again, I cannot stress that enough. This is not the erotic Cinderella hour by any means. But I want it to be where there's a real drive and a real passion. And for me, that is sexual. I know for some people under the queer umbrella, it's not. And perhaps that will make it a little more difficult to view it as an audience, because maybe it's something where you were hoping it was still going to be that kind of androgynous, asexual sort of thing. And it might be that. And that's something that I'll know when I start seeing actors in it. But for me, it's important to show, the prince's bedroom. Like, it's important for me to show that Seven is imperfect, that Seven is fraught with fear and worries, that this Cinderella isn't just dreaming about the prince, because it is a bit of a crush, but it's also about the Cinderella being unhappy, being orphaned, possibly not having dealt with the grief of having lost their parents. You see that a little bit with the Cinderella in Into the Woods, the idea of grief and loss. But there's a way that sometimes grief really kind of returns you into a sort of shell, and it can take longer than you think to kind of come out of it. So I think for me, like with all the things that I do, it's very much about the intention of the moment. And I've written this, but the great thing about a type of play that's this big is that there may be another draft to come once I've heard it. I may have to even some things out. I may be able to boost some things up and have it still be okay. But it's going to be a very interesting thing. And a part of a crowdfund, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, whichever kind of way I go about it, I think it's probably Kickstarter at this point, is about the fact that people are coming alongside in the journey, and people interested in the idea of this kind of updated queer fairy tale with Cinderella tones. You're my people, and I want you to be a part of this, and I want you to bring along people that might not know this is what they want. It may be until someone sees a male presenting Cinderella character with a male presenting prince character that they realize this is what they've been looking for. I mean, I didn't realize how much something like Love, Simon would affect me until the scene with the dad apologizing to his son for all the jokes and the attitude things. And I had thought, I was really past all that, like a teen coming of age story. I didn't think I was at a place in my life where that would affect me anymore, because I'd gone so much further than that in my own journey. But something about that really struck me and really kind of brought me in to myself and made me tear up a little bit. And so it's really hard to say exactly who all Cobblestone Kingdom might reach, but I want to reach as many people as possible. And, it's a big project. I know what I'm asking for, and I know it's will probably subsume a couple of years at least, but I think that's okay. And there'll be stuff all the way up those steps of those years. So it's not like it's going to be like you're not going to hear anything from me for 2 years about it. It's very much a communal project at that point. Um, and I think it's going to be really good. It's going to be really great. There's a very clear direction for it. It's not just Cinderella. I mean, that would have been something to write. That would have been much easier than what I ended up with. But there's going to be something really satisfying about this. Um, and I think I'm going to end there before I ramble too much because I'm at 25 minutes and something. I think I'm going to do another video probably definitely after Christmas because I'm going to take a few days off. But I kind of want to talk about Marceline a little bit. I want to talk about the villainess of the piece that I haven't talked about. I think I'm going to talk about the ravens and about the magic in this universe and kind of, magic in theater in general because it's really fun. That being said, I don't really know what I'm going to talk about because I haven't worked that out yet. But I just want to thank you for watching this. If you're watching this live, watching this later, feel free to leave comments on any of the live versions of this in the past, and then I can answer them potentially. Just know that I'm doing this with intention, and when you see the Kickstarter, I'm hoping that you'll be able to tell how much intention has gone into this and how much this is really about a new generation, new set of stories that are for the queer community, that are by the queer community, that are hopefully partnered, with the queer community and all the people that entails. And so my name is John McDonald, and I hope that once you see the Kickstarter for Cobblestone Kingdom, a gay forest fairy tale, that you'll come along and you'll be part of the journey. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Have a great evening.